We have Dr. Renee Diamond with us today. We are going to talk a little bit about the COVID vaccine, but before we start, do you want to do a little introduction?
Sure. So I'm Dr. Diamond, Renee. I've been with Iowa Specialty now for 7 years, I believe. I did my undergraduate work at University of Portland and then went to med school at Creighton and finished residency at Research Family Practice in Kansas City, and then since then have been here. And when coronavirus hit, I would say we had just opened the Garner Clinic for about 7-8 months. And so it was interesting to be in a new clinic and have that happen right away. But I was able to be part of the COVID task force and help re-engineer how we kind of took care of patients and were able to reach out to patients in a safe manner through the pandemic, and also thinking about airflow in hospital and how do you separate people to be able to take care of people who aren't sick with a respiratory illness but need their chronic care and well visits as well. So it was an interesting phase, and it continues on. Never a dull moment.
And Dr. Diamond's always happy to help us answer questions. So some of the concerns that we've had shared through either our communities, our patients, our staff is really about this vaccine. The technology seems new and different. So big news today that Pfizer was approved by the FDA. What does that actually entail? What is that process to get to this point?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of preclinical work before you even go into the FDA approval process. And the preclinical work is really just how is your immunization that you want to design going to induce someone's immune system to be able to remember an illness and therefore to fight it off so that person wouldn't get as sick as they might otherwise. So the preclinical phase, I'd say, for the mRNA immunizations has been going on for a long, long time. mRNA, so to understand even why we've had preclinical work that has led to the current mRNA immunizations for a long, long while, it's pretty apparent because the influenza virus is an mRNA virus or mRNA disease, as is coronavirus. So because they both are basically a lipid particle, protein particle with an mRNA inside of them, the mRNA technology has been studied to try to develop influenza immunizations. They worked some in this area with, I believe, Ebola, Zika virus. So they were always looking at this in preclinical trials for many other types of diseases or many other diseases specifically. So once they get through the preclinical trials, which is the part that was very, very, thankfully they've been studying and working the bench science of that part for quite a while prior to the COVID pandemic. Then there's phase 1, 2, and 3. In phase 1, they take healthy individuals and enroll them and test the immunization for safety, and also to figure out the actual dose and the dosing strategy. So the mRNA between Pfizer are the Pfizer and Moderna immunizations. There was a total of about 70,000 people enrolled in both of those trials, and I think Pfizer was around 44,000 of the people. And then phase 2 and 3 trials from there enroll more people and study the efficacy more. And the whole while they're tracking side effects and profiles and expanding the amount of people who are given the immunizations so they can make sure that something that they're designing can be the most broadly applicable. Because clearly anyone can get infected with coronavirus, so they don't want to study just a small niche and then try to give it to everyone. So then after the phase 3 trial, basically that determines, like I said, more people, what is the efficacy. So they've gone through those phases, and then there's phase 4 is considered just the ongoing systematic tracking of long-term side effects, any long-term data for efficacy. Does the efficacy wane as the virus is similar to influenza with coronavirus? How will it mutate? How fast will it mutate? And how do we have to adjust immunizations in order to keep up with that? So yeah, there was, in the Pfizer specifically, there was around 44,000 people enrolled. And today was the day that they approved it for 16 and above. And then I believe the 12 through 15 is still under emergency authorization use because they haven't collected enough data to give that group full approval at this point. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
So then one of the other questions that I've heard is, how does the vaccine actually impact our system? So I know that there's people that have concerns about like the long-term effects of like, I'm going to inject this into my system and it's going to stay with me forever. So can you explain maybe a little bit about how this particular vaccine works?
Sure, yeah. And actually this is why we have our little mock whiteboard here. So I went to, I studied cell and molecular biology, got my degree in biology, undergrad, but did a lot of some of my favorite classes were OChem and cell and molecular biology, so I did teaching assistant stuff for that. So I get to go back and be a big dork like I was in college when patients come in and ask me these questions, which is why I think Amy wanted me to talk today. So how does the mRNA immunizations work? So again, that includes Pfizer and Moderna. So I think of the analogy I kind of like to use is, so the mRNA immunization, the COVID immunization, is like a cholesterol molecule, okay, so fat, and then within the inside is the mRNA. The mRNA is what codes for a very specific shape of a protein, okay? All proteins have a very specific shape. So it codes for a protein that is part of the coronavirus. So that way your body can see what coronavirus looks like and know how to attack it before you ever are infected with it the first time. So what an mRNA immunization does, okay, gosh, let's pretend this is like a cell, okay? And let's pretend this is your mRNA immunization. So these things are going to like fuse together, okay? And in doing that, the mRNA, which is messenger RNA, okay, messenger RNA, that can go, there's these little, they're called ribosomes, but there's little protein factories essentially, and we think of that as a copy machine. And the copy machine, so think of this little protein particle, the mRNA, as a piece of photocopy paper that's going to copy a very specific message. So it does not, so here's the cell's nucleus, okay? This mRNA messenger, actually, this little piece of protein, it never goes into the nucleus. It just goes into the cell, basically is fused with it, and then releases the little piece of photocopy paper, okay? That goes to ribosomes, which then can, basically, this is a big photocopier, make a bunch of these little messengers, little signals, okay? That is how, and then this can send those messengers to the edge of the cells, basically, so that if and when your body's infected by the coronavirus, it sees, so that on the coronavirus, there's something called a spike protein. It's kind of funny that the emoji that, iPhone and stuff uses literally looks like a coronavirus. So anyway, so then if you have a coronavirus come in and infect, this here knows what this looks like already. So that as soon as you get that infection, your body already has a memory and knowledge of what the coronavirus infection looks like, so it can mount an immune system response. So once this actual component of the immunization goes in and mounts an immune response, like artificially triggers an immune response so that you can have that immune system memory, it gets dissolved. Those never last. Even our natural system, that if you have DNA in your cell nucleus that makes RNA that then makes messenger RNA to make any of the proteins, to make my hair, to make my fingernails, to make skin, all the different proteins that make up our body. Even that mRNA that our body naturally manufactures using our own DNA is dissolved and goes away. That's a very transient type of molecule. It's not stable. So that's why, as a former cell and molecular biology person, it was really cool when I learned that they finally got this sort of bench research figured out to make this work. My personal experience getting the mRNA immunization was also interesting because I never did have COVID, never got the infection myself, and the first time my arm hurt a little bit, and then the second dose I didn't feel badly right away, but the next probably 12 hours later I got really sick for about 16 to 18 hours, and it was a dramatic difference. And I could just picture like all of my cells, the second time my body saw it, it was building that memory, that immunity, so that if I ever encounter it now, like my body is very well prepared to defend against the things that it protects against. So, and then as soon as my immune system, because it's not a living infection that we give you in the immunization. So it's not that my body could continue to feel ill. Like literally it stimulated my immune system. And as soon as my body was like, oh, like there's no more, like that mRNA is all used up. We got the knowledge, we got the memory. I was like dramatically better. And my husband can attest to that because he had to deal with me being sick, which is very uncommon. So I was down and out as a mom for about 18 hours. So yeah, so that's kind of, it's pretty messy. I don't know, but that's basically how it works.
I think that's interesting. I think it explains better how it works with our system instead of like, I know there's a lot of people that have that concern of like, it's a live virus, I'm gonna get COVID from it versus like the influenza versus, I mean like, that's always kind of that preconceived notion.
Yeah,
right?
and it's been interesting to hear patients who have had the immunization, who have had COVID, and what their experience has been like getting it. Both the infection and the immunization, either or both sequentially. I would say that it seems to me the patterns are that the older individuals who've had the immunization, just because their immune systems aren't as robust as a younger immune system, it seems that they get less ill from their 2 shots. Like they don't have as much of a response where they feel sick. And I feel like younger people have more of that, like they actually might feel sick. And so we have the Pfizer immunization all the immunizations in Iowa come through the counties. So we have some of the Hancock County supply here, and we give those, and we try to do it a little bit strategically when people come in, because I'll tell them like, well, if you have a wedding tomorrow or something, like we have it and we're happy to give it to you. Do you want to be a little bit strategic? Because I don't want you to, I could not have worked that second day. I had my second dose, and so I was happy I did it on a Friday. So I just try to help people plan it so that they can have that protection they want, but also not miss something major in their life. Mm-hmm.
So what are you recommending for your patients? I mean, I feel like everybody should talk to their provider about it. And like, if you've reacted maybe to the flu vaccine, is that something that you still recommend the COVID vaccine?
Sure. So they're both RNA viruses, and the flu immunization is different than the mRNA technology. So I would not say that if you've had, first off, if people say they've had reactions to this or that, my first questions are, what is your reaction? Because there's some medicines that we give to people who make you nauseous, and that's a predictable side effect. The most common reactions to any immunization is usually is injection site pain, and then in like large local reactions like redness, swelling, temporarily. So usually, where do I start with my patients? I always usually start with a question. Like I ask if they've had it, and I think everywhere you get the COVID immunization, we put it into the state system. So our electronic health records sync with the state system, so I can simply refresh that and I can see if someone had it or didn't have it. And then if they've had it, I usually ask them how that went for them or whatever. And if they didn't have it, I just start by asking if they have questions about it and let them know that it's available here. Then I just provide a lot of education. So to all my patients, there's varying levels of people who really want to get the immunization or who don't want to get the immunization. And I'm comfortable talking to people from wide varieties of backgrounds. So I usually like to hear, if you aren't willing to get it or not interested in getting it, are there hesitations or education that I can provide just to answer your questions, And I still feel like at the end of the day, I want people to feel comfortable with something they're putting into their bodies. So that's generally my approach. I've had some people ask me if I think there's going to be booster doses or ongoing series. And, in contrast to some immunizations that we have that are against bacteria tend to exchange like little parts of themselves to foster antibiotic resistance, and for us to not be able to treat with the same antibiotics or to change the antibiotics we use. But the bacteria don't change as dramatically or maybe as quickly as viruses do. I'm not trying to say that. But so because there's always some evolution and drift of viruses and rearrangement, it wouldn't surprise me if, and just like now we're seeing the major circulating strand or variant in the United States is the Delta variant. So just as we've seen, the immunizations aren't as protective against that strain or that variant, there will likely, as it evolves, potentially be need for boosters. It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. I just think that it's been, it's interesting. I hear patients, who seem upset that an immunization has been offered so quickly or promoted so quickly. And I totally understand that it feels quick. At the same time, I know that, legislation was pushed through to allow the private sector to do a lot of work that they would not have been able to do without the funding, to do a lot faster than it would have been done otherwise. So it's not, and I think the alternative was to not try to fix the pandemic, and then, so I think there was a lot of well-intentioned people with a decent and quite a robust background of bench science trying to make the mRNA immunizations come to fruition. And that really, when people started dying in larger numbers, that was where they said, this has a lot of promise to get to market if we have put the work into it. So that's kind of a lot of rabbit trails, but I think there may be immunization boosters, and I think it's an impressive use of bench science, like in an actual applicable, and I wasn't fearful for getting the immunization myself, partially because I was thought it was kind of neat, understanding the bench science of it. So I just talked to patients about their past experience, what informs their current decision making, ask them what are their priorities, what's their, what's the bottom line, and what are the kind of peripheral things that are important to them. We go from there.
Thank you so much for all of that additional information.
You're welcome.